Welcome back to Sage Advice. I'm your host, Hamza Khan, and this is the show where we explore the wisdom that helps us live, lead, and love more fully before it's too late to ask for it. My guest today is Tim Arnold, someone who has spent decades helping leaders find clarity in chaos. He's worked with everyone from Fortune 500 CEOs to Nobel laureates, and his superpower is helping people hold complexity, not run from it. Tim's journey is anything but ordinary. He's launched and sold a business, led a homeless shelter, pioneered a social enterprise, and written best-selling books that challenge the myth of either-or thinking. His core idea, lead with and, isn't just a leadership philosophy. It's a way of being, and I think it's exactly what we need more of right now. Tim Arnold.
We've talked about having this conversation for a long time. I'm very excited to be here, excited about the conversation, and honored to be a guest.
Dude, thank you for making the time, and thank you for what I'm certain will be a masterclass in leadership, in generosity of insight, expertise, background, perspective. I can't wait, man. I want to start things off by acknowledging and just thanking you for a gift that you gave me a couple of years ago. And I don't know if you remember you gave me this gift, but this happened at the Speaker Spotlight holiday party, I think in 2023, so 2 years ago. It was my first Speaker Spotlight party, and these parties happen usually in the Stories building on Duncan across from Pi. And it was my first one, and I walked up there, and it was so overwhelming. I mean, I stepped in there, and I was like, oh man, am I in the right place? I already struggle with imposter syndrome. This just took it to a whole other level. And so I was greeted by, I think it was Paula, Zoila, Kristen was there, and I just felt really glad to see some familiar faces, people that we interact with on a regular basis. But then I turned my head, and there they were. Boom, astronaut. Boom, Olympian. Boom, CEO. Boom, singer. Boom, actor. And I was like, oh my God, what did I do? This is not okay. I'm little old Hamza, born in Queens, raised in Scarborough. At some point, they're going to figure out that they made the wrong decision by bringing me on the roster. And then a few minutes after I was just lingering around behind the registration table because I didn't want to fully immerse myself in there, you walked in. And you walked in, you knew who I was by name, you gave me a big old hug, and we started talking. And within 2 minutes, I felt like I've known you my entire life. You gave big brother, mentor, friend energy, and you helped me. The gift that you gave me was you helped me feel like I belonged in the space. And I think that is another one of your superpowers, sir. You truly have this grounded energy that is inclusive, that is welcoming, that empowers the people that you work with, that are lucky to work with you, but also people like me who are just meeting you for the first time. So thank you for that gift, dude. I'm not sure you know that you gave that to me, or maybe you do, but it fundamentally changed my relationship with Speaker Spotlight and this wild world of keynote speaking.
Well, you're welcome. And I didn't know that. I remember meeting you. I had followed your work online and was excited actually to connect with you. So when I saw you, I beelined to have a conversation. I wouldn't have known what you were feeling. That said, I would echo those feelings because I remember my first spotlight party thinking, oh my goodness, where do you start at this place? And I consider myself to be almost a capital E extrovert. And yet I was feeling like, okay, what's the next step? Who am I going to have a conversation with? You gotta be ready for that one.
You have to.
So I loved our conversation because it actually allowed me just to breathe and connect and look at it. Here we are now.
Yeah, man. And you have been so gracious with your time. You've been gracious to me, my wife, Bailey. We've had many conversations online at other parties as well. I've had a chance to see you in action. We even just missed each other when we were collaborating for a leadership development program for a major university in the States. It has just been so cool to orbit you, to watch your career, because in many ways you were extending the runway of what's possible for me. And this was echoed by Martin too. At that same party, I was talking to Martin, and Martin said, there's a couple of people you need to meet. And you were one of the three. Oh, wow. You were one of the three. He's like, talk to Tim. He's like, there's a lot of synchronicity over here. And when he introduces, like, do you know each other? And we're like, yeah, man. We've known each other our whole lives. We just met like an hour ago. I want to reciprocate that gift for you, sir, in a small way. We start every show on Sage Advice by giving our illustrious guests a gift, which is a throwback to the previous iteration of the show called Ideas into Action. And it's a gift that I spend a lot of time thinking about. What and who and why, all of these questions converge into a book. And so the book I have selected for you, Tim, and I hope you haven't read it, and if you have read it, all good, pay it forward. That book, I think, captures the essence of the work that you do. It is My Life in Full by Indra Nooyi.
Oh, I'm excited.
Have you read this?
I've not read this book.
Oh,
and
dude.
I'm leaving here to get on a plane, so I've got perfect time to open it up and get into it.
This is, man, I'm so excited for you to read this. This is for you, sir. The reason I selected this is because in 2007, Indra Nooyi did something quite revolutionary at the time in the world of CPG, in the world of food and drinks. She decided to go left when the rest of the industry was going right. She hired the company's first, and sorry, I should clarify for the viewers and listeners, Indra Nooyi is the ex-CEO of PepsiCo.
That's right.
And at a time when all of her competitors were finding more ways to rehash old ideas, put more sugar into things, she hired the company's first chief scientific officer, which gave her the insight to make investments into healthier food and beverage options that have secured Pepsi's dominance for the foreseeable future. But how did that happen? Well, she did something quite remarkable that I think ties into your leadership philosophy around lead with and. She said in a Freakonomics podcast episode that I'm not just a CEO, I'm also a consumer. I remember hearing that, being floored. I was like, wow, I don't hear CEOs talk about that a lot. It's usually like, I'm the CEO, I'm the person at the top of the RACI model. You know, I'm responsible, accountable, I consult, I inform, so on and so forth. But there's like a distance between me and the front line. And beyond that, there's a distance between me and the people that I interact with. But she broke that paradigm for me. She said, I'm a leader and a person who interacts with my business. And I thought, wow, if only more leaders could do exactly that. You have captured that idea in Lead with And. And when I read that title, when you told me about it at the Spotlight Party, I said, man, Tim has found it. Like, this is it. 3 simple words that just capture the wealth of ideas that many leadership researchers, practitioners are thinking about, but unable to express with such brevity and with such precision, I would say. I'd love to know what inspired the Lead with And book for you and the Lead with And phrase.
So the Lead with And book and the Lead with And phrase, I'll have to separate those two, because the Lead with And phrase would be similar to, I'm an idea person. I feel like I get about 100 ideas a day, and I say to my team, just so you know, only about 2 or 3 will be good. So, and sometimes they're really good. But the challenge I have is I'm equally excited about all of them.
Yeah.
And that's just how I'm wired. So I feel like the best ideas I have are when I'm out for a run. And I was 3/4 complete in my writing of the book. And I went for a run, and I had, I think, 2 different working titles. And I don't know exactly how it hit me, but I just, as soon as I thought Lead with And, I was like, oh, that's it. No question. And again, because I know even ideas I'm excited about aren't always the best, I got back and quickly sent a text to a few of my inner circle, and everyone pretty much said yes. Like, no conversation, like, that's it. And it's been great. I mean, it really has been a wonderful way to sum up the big idea, and it's stuck.
And you got it, man. Like, that is up there in the pantheon with succinct ideas that are intuitive. I would say that that is in the same category as Start With Why, in the same category as the lollipop moment, same category as the let them theory. I mean, it's there. You have found it, and you have totally owned it, man. I'm just so proud of you. And like, you've given us, myself and other speakers and other thinkers, permission to engage with our own work in a way that distills the complexity. You know, I think that I look at some of my old iterations of my slides, there's 164 slides in one variation. I'm like, dude, Tim was able to get that, all of this, into 3 words. What am I doing here? I want to take it back. I really want to understand how your journey has unfolded over the course of your career, and maybe even your life, and how you've been able to master this ability to simplify, to take complexity and reduce it into its most useful components. Take us all the way back, man. I'd love to hear from your perspective what the inciting force in your story is.
Hmm.
You've shared your bio with us. We're familiar with your work. We've read your books. But from your perspective, what was the until one day in Tim Arnold's story?
It's a great question. I have a few thoughts that come to mind. It was interesting when I was working on my last book. I needed a break. I just needed to kind of clear my head and get out of my routine. And I went on a small retreat, and the facilitator who actually ran the retreat center one day just gave us a prompt in the morning to think about. And it was, I want you to spend the morning thinking about the best decisions you've ever made in your life. And that was it. That was it. I thought, wow, gosh, that's a big question. What was fascinating though to me was, honestly, I think it took me 15 to 20 minutes to have a list that I felt was confidently the list. And it was a short list of, as you say, things that, from that decision, everything changed. So, one that came to mind was in the end of my first year of university, my undergrad, I had planned on going home and work the same, job I'd worked the last few summers in the small rural town of Southern Ontario, Canada. And
Right.
I was, the week before school ended, I was out one night and with friends, and a friend of a friend talked about this job they had working at this ranch in the Western US. And for whatever reason, it just kind of hooked me. I thought, oh, that sounds so intriguing, so interesting. And then I went home and I kept thinking about it to the point that I actually talked to my friend to connect me with their friend. And I went and met with them the next day. And I said, tell me more about that. I'm so intrigued. Long story short, within 24 hours, I was given a job offer at the ranch.
What?
I'd never been on an airplane. It was at a part of the US that I had to get an atlas out to say, where is this state? I mean, and I went to our career services at the school and I got a work permit in no time. And, 5 or 6 days later, I was on a plane. And what was interesting is that job kind of changed everything. It was the first time, even more than university, where I felt like I was completely on my own in terms of in an area, in a circle that was new to me, no one I knew around me. And for me, that was kind of the beginning of just realizing I can kind of be whoever I want.
Wow.
I was in an environment with new challenges that I was stepping into. So that was one, deciding to say yes to work at the ranch.
Mm-hmm.
The second one was after saying no, I finally conceded to a relentless friend that was determined to get me on a blind date. And I finally said yes, went in kind of with a horrible attitude. Went to the restaurant that evening and supposed to be a double date, but my friend and his partner conveniently were late.
Slick.
So found the person who I was set up with. And by the end of that evening, it wasn't like a lightning bolt. It was just this piece of like, I'm going to marry this person.
Wow.
And I'd never had that. It was just so clear, so obvious. And so that was number two. And then the third one was I had a business that was doing well. I enjoyed it. Out of the blue, was given the opportunity to sell it to a competitor. And right at the same time, I was doing a lot of volunteer work in homelessness. And this small shelter was kind of getting off the ground. And they had asked if I'd be open to providing leadership for a year or so. And again, that wasn't my wheelhouse. Other than volunteering, I had no background in homelessness. I liked what I did, but I said yes to selling the business and yes to stepping into this leadership role. And when I looked at this short list that I journaled, I realized that the best decisions in my life so far have come from situations where I pushed myself to say yes and lean into change that I didn't have to make. I pushed myself, and it wasn't change that I was, running from something. Actually, things were fine, but to actually run to something that I felt had potential And it was interesting because at that stage in my life, it was, 2 decades later, I thought, how do you keep that in your life? How do you keep that thread of, you know, to be cliche, getting out of the comfort zone, to actually stepping into that space where there's a lot of unknown and a lot of uncertainty. And it's not throw caution to the wind, but really be open to, what your spirit, your gut saying, what might be next. And I feel like that's a really long answer to the question you asked, but I would feel like the best parts of my life now have come from a few key decisions where I leaned into change that I didn't have to lean into. And yeah, now it would feel like, okay, in the chapter I'm in and the chapters to come, I don't want to lose that. I don't want comfort to become complacency.
Man, what an answer. That was cinematic for me. It truly was. I just want to clarify one thing. So this retreat that you went to, did this happen recently? Or
It
did this
was
happen at the beginning of the story before the ranch?
no. This retreat was just within the last 5 years.
Okay,
It was
okay,
just
okay,
that
okay.
retreat was when I was asked to kind of think about the best decisions of my life, and then that took me back, decades to saying yes to put on my cowboy hat and work on a ranch in the state of Wyoming.
I see this so clearly, man. This has such potential to be a movie. And I think that I think if we're getting like the older version of you played by somebody, I think John Hamm would be my choice, right?
Wow, Mad Men is
Mad Men.
probably my top five for sure, and I'd take that any day.
Okay, so John Hamm is the old Tim Arnold, and then I think it's like probably Timothy Chalamet as like the
Wow.
young Tim Arnold,
Wow.
right? Let's just do it. Let's just
I'll take it. I don't feel like I can pull off the job, but hey, if you feel it,
well,
I'm not going to argue.
you're gonna consult on the film. They're Timmy and John are gonna follow you around and learn your mannerisms a bit. But I think the movie starts at this retreat, right? You have somebody that is so generous with their insight as you are. You're the one going and acting as the sage to other people and providing them with questions that they then take and have these transformative experiences with. For example, I'm probably going to write that list out of like, what are the decisions that I've made, the best decisions in my life. And
Mhm.
I don't think I've ever engaged with that.
Mhm.
And I already feel how transformative this is going to be. I'm like champing at the bit to do this.
So I'll say,
Please.
do that because again, based on my experience, it's a powerful exercise. I don't think it'll actually take you as long as you think,
Right.
but make sure you limit your list to 3 to 5 things.
3 to 5 things.
3 to 5
Bingo.
best decisions you ever made.
Okay.
And then I'm going to follow up with you on that because I'm intrigued.
Dude, I'm intrigued. I actually don't know how I'm going to answer this question. And so, you look back at this and now I'm picturing, chapter one, you see, the Wyoming, the plain lands, there's dust everywhere. And there's Timmy in his denim jacket with a bag over his back, just going and, signing up to join this ranch. So there's like chapter one. Fast forward a little bit, slightly older Timothy Chalamet is being dragged to a restaurant. Like, I don't want to do this, man. Sits down and then just knows the sparks fly. And did that blind date turn into your current partner?
It did. Yeah.
Wow.
It did. Yeah,
Man.
we were engaged within 6 months, married in a year.
And then fast forward, now we get to a younger John Hamm that is selling his business and thinking, what do I want to do now? I'm feeling a little bit of a rival fallacy. It's like I've given so much of my purpose to this thing and it's not there anymore. This is clearing the cobwebs a little bit. And to your point, I've said yes to leaning into that change, to stepping into the unknown, the uncertainty. My heart is pulling me in this direction. Let me do it. So in all of these different touch points, the same story occurs, which is being open to change. Multiple heroes' journey wrapped up in one narrative arc. And I just think that is an exceptional answer. All of our past guests have shared one or two inciting forces. I see the successive thread. I see the succession of all four of these. They actually coalesce into one big inciting force. I'm very curious to know, Tim, along this journey, what was the best piece of advice that you received? That maybe you read, that maybe somebody gave to you, maybe that just came in a fever dream. What was the best piece of advice that helped you along this hero's journey?
The best piece of advice. So the best piece of advice, you're gonna laugh because I keep part of that advice as a bookmark in my book. I take it with me because I do a lot of speaking and teaching around it. But I'll share it with you in a moment. it came to me at a time when I was uh, stuck. I would have felt so. I'm going to say early 20s. I was raised in a super conservative, pretty restrictive religious upbringing. So we were, um, there was a lot of clear boundaries. Things were right and wrong. I was and I gained lots from that upbringing, but also there was a lot of challenges around that. You don't even know this, but I'm a accountant by trade.
I
So
had no
I
idea.
I do the right and wrong real well.
Yeah, the either or.
Either or. And there was a time, early 20s, where things weren't off the rails. I think actually, to the outside world, things looked great up and to the right, but I just felt stuck. And it wasn't just vocationally, it was relationally, even spiritually, just on many levels, just felt like something just wasn't, my tires were in the mud.
Mm.
And a friend of mine, similar to how we kicked things off, gave me a book.
Okay.
He said, I think you need to read this. And in the book was even a page that had been dog-eared. So again, you always are like, oh, okay, well, this is intriguing, but I'll jump into it. So what was interesting, in the page that he had marked turned out to be something that at the time kind of stopped me in my tracks. But now I've read, I couldn't even tell you how many times. So I'm gonna actually read from this. Now I need to qualify. The author's talking about living a spiritual life.
Sure.
She's not talking about religion. She's not even talking about faith. She's talking about living inspirited. So living with vitality,
Oof.
showing up with presence.
Oof.
And what was interesting, and I'm actually going to use her words because this is something that I keep with me all the time. She says, living a spiritual life means we're able to live our lives in total polarity. This means that we're at ease between in-between spaces, between traditional and progressive viewpoints, between rational and emotional responses, between taking action and sometimes just being there, between solitude and leisure, between fasting and feast, between discipline and wildness. She starts to pull it together. She says, if we're not growing in our spiritual life, we get stuck on one end of the spectrum or the other, and we end up bland, lukewarm, mediocre, and isolated. The only way to live an inspirited life is to be able to touch both sides at the same time, becoming more aware of who we are, whom we choose to be, and in challenging times, how we show up. So I read that and I went, wow, that makes so much sense. And I've completely missed that perspective. Like that is something that, again, when you see it, you can't unsee it. And yet in my right, wrong, good, bad, either or, heaven and hell upbringing, it was just a perspective I missed. Now, what was fascinating, not only were the words, but this was written by St. Teresa in 1515. Okay. So this was not a new concept. This was not the kind of flavor of the month leadership idea. This is just something that has kind of always been, and yet somehow was a blind spot for me. And, as you know, not only did that help me at the time, it really impacted how I see the world. And what I even would have, first of all, for my own good, tried to pursue learning about and understanding and applying this idea of complexity and paradox and dilemma and polarity. And again, it's once you start to look for it, you see it everywhere. Mm-hmm. So I don't even know if the friend who gave me the book knows the profound impact it had on my life, but it was exactly what I needed when I needed it. And I'll send you the passage later so you can hold on to that.
I would love that so much. You were reminding me of something that our guest on episode 3, Janani, said. She said that books arrive in your life exactly when you need them. And to receive that book, that quote at that time was perfect. I wrote over here bits and pieces of that quote, and I want to get the full version of it too. But the two or the three things that leaped out at me is living a spiritual life means living within polarities. And I thought, wow, I mean, you got it. There it is right there. Alpha, omega, beginning, end, black and white, heaven and hell. It's a spectrum. Mm-hmm. And then the last bit over here, which is touch both sides at the same time. Man, that to me feels like the spiritual core of your philosophy. Right?
Mhm.
Lead with and touch both sides at the same time. You can be both a consumer, you can be both a CEO. You can be the one running PepsiCo and setting direction, establishing culture, vision, mission, values, principle, purpose, whatnot. But you can also be the person going into the stores and asking customers,
Mhm.
what's important to you? What's important to your family? You can go into homes and open up refrigerators and say, why are you drinking Coke? Tell me why you like Coke better than Pepsi. Like that's it right there.
Yeah.
That is how you embrace change.
Yeah, and I think that touch both sides at the same time is also, I don't think she's talking about compromising or trade-offs where you do a little bit of both. I think it's do both fully, be both a teacher and a learner fully,
Mm,
be someone who is an optimist and a realist fully,
wow.
and depending on the time and the day and the relationship, I may lean towards one side or the other, but the goal is to feel like I'm fully embracing uh, the benefit, the value uh, of both sides.
Wow. Man, there's a lot I want to ask you over here. So please bear with me. Bailey and I, a place that we love going to is Rome.
Mm.
We love going to Italy in general. I think in another lifetime I was in and around Italy. I don't know how. If you subscribe to the idea of past lives, I think maybe I was a merchant, maybe I was in the military, maybe I was a court jester. I don't know, but
But you were
I
there.
was there, man. I was there. I was there. And we went to go see the Sistine Chapel, I think 2 years ago. And Bailey just said something to me that floored me. She said, man, Jesus Christ was a thought leader.
Hmm.
And I was like, ah. She's like, yeah, he was a really good speaker. Like he was able to do his own events and stuff. Right? I'm like, I get it. I see it. And I'm like, interesting. Maybe like this thing, this movement, this institution that was created, Christianity, or you take any of the prophets and the Abrahamic faiths and beyond that as well, came from somebody who was inspired, who was then able to galvanize others with that idea. But it's interesting that you grew up in a conservative religious upbringing. Can I ask which faith?
Yeah, so we were we were what are called non-denominational, which is a generally means that you were pretty far on the extreme side. So it was a fundamentalist approach to religion,
Gotcha.
and again, I don't want to bash my upbringing.
Of
I
course.
ended up gaining so much from the way I was raised, and even some of the traditions that I was raised in. And we were the kids who couldn't play cards, couldn't
Yep.
go to dances.
Yep.
We were the
Yep.
kids who couldn't, we weren't allowed to have what was called secular music in the
Sure.
home.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
meant that.
I can relate, man.
So it was, and I never felt oppressed as a kid. I actually would feel the opposite. I had so many wonderful experiences in that, I call it quote unquote restrictive upbringing.
Yeah.
But it was all about right and wrong and black and white and good and bad. And I gained that clearly. I
Absolutely.
emerged into the world with that clear right, wrong. This is in line. This is out of line. And it's funny because this is a reality of bringing up kids. There's a role that we have to actually show what is right and wrong and what
Mm-hmm.
is good and bad,
Mm-hmm.
because the reality of the world is there is right and wrong and there is good and bad.
Right.
And there are situations where you can pick a side. And once we have that, or at least try to continually make sure that we choose the right side when there's a right and wrong, we also enter a time of our life where we deal with situations that are right and right
Yes.
and are beautifully complex
Yes.
and are gray and there's mystery. And for me, that was something that I just couldn't navigate at a young age, because I could only ever always see things through like I say, a black and white, right or wrong, pick a side perspective.
You were in it, man. I totally get that. And I had a similar upbringing too. I grew up in a conservative religious household. It was a Muslim household. And I remember always just feeling like this seems a little bit too restrictive. The same dichotomies presented themselves: right, wrong, heaven, hell, so on and so forth. And I ultimately believe that all religions are net positive. They're all attempts to organize life and to create oneness with the world. But, I went through my own journey like you did in engaging with polarity and engaging with both sides at the same time. And I found myself on the other side of that equation thinking, I like bits and pieces of all of these religions. And then I got into this line of work and I'm like, oh man, like every organization is attempting to create a micro religion. I mean, I literally created a document 2 days ago called a brand Bible, right? I'm building something called a single source of truth. And I'm like, hey man, as the CEO of this company over here, is the vision over here like me establishing a pillar? What's going on here? And I just feel like, when we talk about like the sage way or like the skills camp method, this sounds indistinguishable to me from the 5 pillars of Islam or like the 12 commandments, so on and so forth. It's all in the same realm of helping people organize complexity and just orient people towards doing things right. But I want to ask you a question before I get into leadership here. How did this engagement with the quote change your relationship, if at all, with your faith?
Oh, that's a great question. It resulted in quite a faith journey. I think that there was some deconstruction, some assimilation, some reconstruction. I think there was a season where I almost had to kind of let stuff go.
Yeah.
Which was, which at that stage of my life felt so vulnerable and almost naked because that's all I ever knew. I knew that I wasn't, flipping the bird to everything that I was raised in. I just needed space to be free of it for now. And that led to an era where I actually felt like I dug deeper into questioning, studying, talking. I was super fortunate to have just consistently people show up in my life that I felt were giving me the next step of what I needed to focus on or look at or study and yeah, I years and years ago, a friend and a bit of a spiritual mentor of mine said something to the effect, at the end of the day, all of us are only going to have about 30% right. And this was someone who was like a high level official in a certain faith community. And I thought, I love that humility to say, hey, you still got to figure out what you feel is right for you.
Yeah.
And actually have conviction and the humility of, and no one's got the corner market or the corner on truth, right? Like we're going to do our best, and someday, whatever it looks like, we're going to realize like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking?
What was I thinking? Yeah. Only 30% of us have a full grasp on that. That is hilarious, man. And you described it as a journey. You described it as a spiritual journey. And that's very refreshing for me to hear from somebody whose work I'm somewhat familiar with. And if it's anything like mine, we're usually in secular environments, depending on the client. I'm in talks right now with Chick-fil-A. So I'm really excited to see what happens with that. I'll be able to really talk about like light and love and leadership in a totally different context. But, the spiritual journey is interesting, and people gave you that next step. I have a question related to that, but before we go into that, you shared how that quote changed your relationship with faith. How did it change your relationship with leadership?
So at that stage, because when I first came across this, that was in my early 20s, I was doing, some work in the leadership development space. I was in my early 20s doing a lot of adventure guiding. So I was doing team building, team bonding type programs with paddling and high ropes courses and mountain trips with executive groups. I, at that stage, was doing some leadership facilitation, but wasn't really making the connection between that and leadership. I wasn't quite there yet, and would have totally at that point seen leadership again as a small echelon of people, at the top of whatever.
Sure.
So it wasn't until the years to come that I started to look at. And it's interesting because I'm thinking about this real time, so you'll just have to bear with me as I
Of
kind of make
course.
sense of my thoughts. But when I got into the world of leadership development, again, as an outdoor adventure guide, one thing that I loved the work I did, and I knew that it had impact. One thing though that I always just felt a little bit just not great about is you'd have this amazing outdoor adventure, and sometimes we work with executive teams and they'd be on these challenges, and then we'd debrief later, and you'd always hear the same things every single time. Oh, we just needed to trust each other. Oh, we just need to communicate. Oh, we just needed a leader. And I always, and again, I was this know nothing 22-year-old. Something in me was like, yes, and there, yes, that's right. But that's almost, you didn't need me to take you on a mountain expedition to figure that out. Like, you need to communicate, you need to trust, you need a leader. There's got to be something more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And that would have been that discontent with overly simplistic answers for complex situations would be what would have gotten me down the path I'm on of looking into the complexities of leadership and looking at the realities of leadership that aren't this or that, but this and that. I didn't know it at the time, but it would have been that experience that I just felt like there was, we were, it was almost lazy thinking. It was like, yeah, that's true, but come on. We knew that already. Like,
Right.
it's got to be more than that. And, yeah, and that, fast forward, I don't know how many years, but when I'm starting to do my own work, I always wanted to be clear that, tapping into complexity doesn't mean that things have to be necessarily hard. It just means we're acknowledging the underlying tensions, the underlying situations that aren't this or that, but this and that, which I just didn't feel was getting talked about. It wasn't being acknowledged. It wasn't being, brought into leadership curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely felt like there might be something there for me to do more research on, more work on, more writing, more.
Dude, this is what you're stating over here. I understand that there's probably some viewers and some listeners who are like, this seems obvious, but man, I'm telling you, it's not. Like, to your point, you were with executives on these excursions and they were arriving at these conclusions that made you feel, yes, like it's obvious and we need to do this. But this idea of there being one best way to do something has been moving through time for all of the evolution of modern management / leadership. And that's sort of where I do my work, the delineation between the two disciplines. Yes, organizations need management. Yes, I believe that, people should have management responsibilities, manage things, manage budgets, events, and processes, but people need to be led. That's sort of the one area where I think that there is like an either or, but I'm very open to the possibility that maybe there's a reconstitution happening over here. I bring this up because Frederick Winslow Taylor, I believe, this idea of Taylorism, the one best way to get things done, this really informed some of the early factory thinking, specifically with Henry Ford. There's a very specific way to do something. But, in this world of complexity, of volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity, there's many different ways to arrive at the same goal. And so the how can be left open to discussion. But I think even to a certain extent, the what needs to be co-created. And that requires leaders like yourself, leaders like Indra Nooyi, who are able to hold multiple polarities at the same time, who are able to touch both sides at the same time. Mm-hmm. It's just so cool and so refreshing to hear this perspective from you, somebody who is so far along in their thought leadership journey as a keynote speaker, as a multi-award-winning, best-selling author multiple times over, as an entrepreneur. Like, you are embodying a level of thinking here that I wish more people had, man. And I'm very curious to know, like, at this stage of your life, at this stage of your career, when you've achieved a level of mastery, what are some things that you're wrestling with? What is a piece of advice that has entered into Tim Arnold's world that feels true, that somebody gave you or maybe you read, but you're kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to think about this. Like, talk us through some of the change friendliness. How would a change-friendly person like yourself engage with that? Like, I'm so curious to know.
So just to make sure I understand the question, something that I believe but is not out there yet. It's still under development. It's still being worked on. Is that what you're asking?
I think so. So when I
And
asked this to, episode one guest, this is season one, episode one guest, Summer, her answer was, Dr. Summer, she said, everything happens for a reason. She's like, it feels right, but I'm not quite
mm.
sure about that. It's sage advice all the same, but it hasn't landed for me. Is there any sage advice that feels right to you, but hasn't quite landed?
So as I've kind of talked around so far, the work that I do helps people name and then hopefully manage what I call tensions to manage. So not problems to solve, where you can pick a side and be done with it. And again, there's parts of life where problem solving is great. I was an accountant. Like, pick the right answer, pick it quick, done. There's an element of life though, and I think when we're talking about leadership, I think when we're talking about tackling hard things, where there's a both and. There's two sides that are equally true and equally important. We still have to make decisions, but we've got to hold on to the wisdom and the values of both sides. And, in leadership, there's some unavoidable ones. Like, we've got to embrace change while at the same time hold on to stability and tradition. We have to be both confident. We can say, you know what, you can follow me, you can believe in this, you can believe in us, while at the same time being humble. I'm looking to learn. I'm always curious. We have to be, as communicators, truthful and candid. At the same time, we got to be tactful and diplomatic. Well, these are again, not problems to solve, but tensions to manage. And in fact, if something's really a tension and you just pick one side and neglect the other, it just won't work long term. It's kind of like, today you're going to breathe about 20 to 22,000 times. Well, you can't wake up and choose inhale. Inhale's great for a while, but the moment that you overfocus on inhale and neglect exhale, you're blue in the face.
Yeah.
And similar with change, stability, truth, and tact, the moment that we overfocus on one side to the neglect of the other, we're in trouble. That I believe, and that I have spent most of my career researching and writing about and applying to leadership. But I'm always looking for tensions that haven't been named, or for whatever reason I haven't identified. And one that I am very, very intrigued and even fascinated by right now, and I'm not even sure if this is the right language, but the language that I use is called striving and accepting. And I would say the application is very much more personal. So to be the best version of myself, I want to, on one hand, strive. And I do the striving thing pretty naturally. Set goals, set targets. Don't be satisfied with kind of where I'm at, but push myself. And sometimes it's push others to go further. But I'm going to keep the focus on myself, like that striving, ever better, constant improvement. And yet, I feel like, I don't just feel this, I've experienced, if it's all striving all the time to the neglect of something, it's burnout, it's dissatisfaction, it's what's next, you're never there. So the best language I have for the yin to the yang is, as much as I want to fully embrace striving, I want to fully embrace accepting. And accepting is recognizing that I'm enough. Accepting is recognizing that I'll never fully get there. Accepting is recognizing that, all of us have both parts of us that are beautiful and broken. And without the brokenness, we're not actually human. So, it doesn't mean that we're enabling, and it doesn't mean that accepting, again, if you over focus on accepting without striving, I don't think we show up for the world, for our families, for our communities. But how do you live in a space where, going back to the language of touch both sides at the same time, I can wake up in the morning, not a little bit of striving and a little bit of accepting, but actually fully embracing both. Accepting who I am, accepting the limitations that I'll have, accepting that I'll never fully meet the mark, while at the same time striving and pushing. And again, this isn't something that I think I'll ever write about, because I'm still deeply into just figuring it out. But I would say that when when I am at my best, I'm able to manage that tension well, that I can be a person who strives and accepts it simultaneously.
Dude, wow. I'm getting chills here. There's a lot to unpack. First of all, I think you struck gold. Like this is I'm just picturing Timothy Chalamet there in Wyoming with a little pickaxe just panning for gold over there. It's the tension between striving and accepting is so universal, so timely, so relevant. And speaking of Timothy Chalamet, he did an award speech. He won for A Complete Unknown, and I think it was at the SAG Awards. And I've watched this speech probably like 20 times. I'm like, oh shit, it's coming back. Pardon my language. He got on stage and he said, you know, you know the typical award speech. He's like, oh my God, I can't believe that I won. Let me gather my thoughts over here. I want to thank my agents. I want to thank God. Da, 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 da. I'm so happy to be in this category with everybody else. Dude, Timothy went in the opposite direction. Timothy goes up there. He's like, I don't think a lot of actors talk about this, but like, I worked really hard for this. I want this. I want to be great at my craft. Like, he is just the personification of striving at a time when I think the zeitgeist is suggesting accept. Like, end shitification has become a word of the year. And it's like, just accept that things are falling apart, things are bad. I was sitting at a panel the other day with all of the four chief economists of the chief economists of every major Canadian bank and the Bank of Canada. And they were just like, we don't know what's going to happen next. We can see 2 years into the future. So there's like a meta feeling of accept, but then you have like these people who are just moving so far in the opposite direction of striving. And both sides feel a little bit, to quote Gen Z, you've got some Gen Zs at home, feels a little ick.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, why does it have to be the intense hustle of Timothy Chalamet, and why does it have to be the nonchalance of some of the people who are just like, let the world happen to us? Why can't we touch both sides at the same time?
Yeah, and I what I would love to even go further with on that is in a way that doesn't settle for meeting in the middle. It's like
Yeah,
to be able to say, no, I haven't heard the speech, but I love what you're saying in that I'm willing to say, no, I'm going for this and I'm setting these expectations high. And the accepting doesn't need to even be in the speech. It's just a presence of, and I don't control the results. And I actually am not going to find joy once I get there. I'm going to find joy right now.
right.
And, it's that fully accepting and fully striving, not 50-50, but 100-100. Like I want to do both really well.
I love that.
And I think that, that is profound. I think the more I try to not only understand it, but like look at how am I managing that. And I think there's a lot of work to be done, and me even getting my head around what does that mean. But it's funny. This is a bit of a rabbit trail, but
Please.
years ago when I was running the homeless shelter early on, um, I came in, and this is almost embarrassing to admit, but we get a group of people and we come up with our mission and our vision and our values, and it was great. One of our values right off the get-go was excellence.
Mm.
And um, and then as you know, it's fine to set mission, vision, values, but you have to live into it. You have to kind of live into what is truly who were we put here to be? What is us at our best? And as much as excellence for me was so important because I wanted to run this well and I wanted to set new standards, there was something about that just didn't totally sit with me. And it was interesting because early on, I remember, the first, season, even the first probably month of our shelter, I was selected to do like a daily devotion. So people who were interested could meet and we would just do a little bit of reflection and reading. And this is generally, 95% folks that are in our shelter, but living in the streets outside of that. And I remember I'd prepare and I'd go in there, and I vividly remember the very first time I went to like lead this morning reflection devotion. I was about to teach, and all these individuals, kind of your stereotypical unhoused or homeless people, were saying things and contributing, and just with this level of openness and honesty and candor that I remember in the moment just inside saying, you can just quiet down and listen.
Huh.
And I just kept listening, and I kept thinking about, wow, this is the most honest group of people I've ever met. And the level of pushback with each other, but also support. And it was a gift, so that as the years progressed, I kept going to this morning kind of devotion reflection, but I actually went to just receive. Flip side of that, so I say that I I kind of, went into the room, feeling like I was bringing this excellence, and then was just so quickly humbled to say, no, 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 you actually are the student here. You've got something to learn here. Like, there's another person right around the same time that was in and out of our shelter a lot. And her name was Delina. Delina was someone who, um, her her brokenness couldn't be hidden. She had been through a lot of abuse in her life. She actually had some even physically, she had an eye that had been sunken and lost an eye, and she also had some intellectual challenges, and she was just someone who couldn't hide her brokenness, and yet she had this laugh, and I mean, it was just beyond belief. It was just this laugh that I could be, at the other end of the shelter, and if you'd hear it, you would just sometimes pause, and it would just lift your spirit. And I remember we had a volunteer who would come to the shelter once a week for a shift. He was a very established business professional. I used to always think, like, how does he find time to do this? But he would always make his shift. And as I slowly got to know the volunteer, he would talk about the fact that, you might not know this, but he had a serious, serious journey with depression and was struggling. And he said the shelter had been really great for him. And again, you'd never know. This is someone who was in the news and all for, up into the right things. Didn't see him for a while. So I reached out to him, and it turned out that he wasn't doing well. Right. He had been home for a while. He was struggling with some mental illness. And I was chatting with him, and he said, you know what? And he goes, I'm going to play you something and just listen. And I was on the other end of the phone. So he said, I'm going to hold this video up. Anyways, he played me a recording of Delina's laugh.
Wow.
And he said, for the last few days, I asked her if I could record her laugh. And he said, this is like the only thing. I'm on every doctor's list of medication known to man. And yet this laugh is the one thing that lifts my spirits. And I thought to myself, like, I hope she knows that. And I hope that this is a person who, again, can't hide her brokenness, but has just so much beauty. And as I was someone who, in the community of our homeless shelter, was able to kind of finally just not have to perform and could actually just admit my brokenness and admit that I didn't have it all together. And then when I looked at people like Delina and others who couldn't hide their brokenness, but through our community, we tried to allow them to see their excellence. I realized that, so for me, excellence and brokenness are actually a both and. And we actually said that we're going to get rid of our higher purpose or our value being excellence. We're going to call it beauty. And beauty is what we're going for, but beauty is actually being able to embrace both excellence and brokenness. And I've been challenged on that. I actually had other shelters like, you can't put brokenness in your value statement. Like that's, and it may not even be right, but I said it's right for us. And I think that when we are at our beautiful best, we're a community that can lean into both our brokenness and our excellence. And I feel like there's something there around striving and accepting.
Oof, man. Dude, Tim Arnold. I don't know if you know this, but one of the guests that we have coming on in a couple of episodes, actually the finale, is somebody who is a sage of mine. You're a sage of mine. All of the guests here are sages of mine, but this one was one of my OGs. And I had a breakfast with him a couple of months ago, and he said something that, like, it frustrated me. He said, I have created a body of work. That's what he said. Like, I've actually done the thing. I've advanced an idea. I've put it out in the world, and it's bigger than me. So I can just accept that. I don't have to strive for more. And I was getting frustrated because I'm like, no, dude, you have so much more to give. Like, you have so much more output that you can put out. Why are you like, why does it feel like you're coasting, man? And over the course of many conversations afterward, I learned more that, yeah, he was feeling a little bit broken, for lack of a better word. And he was just going through his own journey. And rather than putting pressure on him, I said, maybe he's going through an acceptance season. I didn't have the words for it back then, but now you've given me that tension of, between broken, between beautiful, and how that can coalesce in the form of acceptance. And I truly believe now, after this conversation, when I meet him in a couple of weeks, I think I'm going to see a different version of him, because I get the sense that he's exhaling. If we're using the inhale exhale idea, he's just completed a several month-long exhale, and he's ready to inhale again. He's ready to enter into a season of striving. And you reminded me, in sharing the story about Dina's laugh, which is just so poignant, of Japanese art. I don't know how to pronounce it. I think it's called kintsugi. They take broken pottery and they attach it back together with gold or silver or other sort of like precious fillings, and it becomes a new thing. So just imagine this glass over here, if it broke into 15 pieces and we reassembled it with just, some very, very tasteful metallic, adhesive, it becomes a new thing. That seems, man, it seems like a lighter, better way of being. I gotta be honest. I just feel like it's more, you're giving people permission to just accept the full parts of themselves, the parts that are working, the parts that are not working, to again touch both sides and just be. And I'm picturing now, as part of the movie, there's Timothée Chalamet getting prepared to deliver the speech that he's practicing in the mirror. This is what excellence means, and then you go into this room and it's just a lot. People are shouting, people are yelling, people are screaming, people are arguing with each other. It's very discordant. And I just picture the movie just zooming out a little bit, and like nice little gradient on the sides. Things get a little darker, and you just breathe. Just a sigh of relief. So cool, man. Still waters run deep, Tim Arnold. I had no idea. That, and it makes perfect sense now. You don't get to become you without experiencing that long journey, that odyssey, for lack of a better word. Many, many heroes' journeys wrapped up in one life that is still unraveling, which is so cool. And I can't wait to see where you go with this. But I want to challenge your thinking on that note. Let's assume, Tim Arnold, that today was our last day. For whatever reason, I don't know, Igor's in there. Igor might press a button and it's over. And, we have a couple of minutes to make calls to our friends and family, and you're able to get your entire family on a call. And you know what? For some reason on this call, you have current clients, you got prospective clients. Let's take it a step further. The entire world tunes into this conversation. And Tim, you got to put it on the table. The piece of advice that you just want to leave for posterity. What would it be, man?
Oh, so I'm thinking, so I have a 13 and a 14-year-old. And, I think that with kids, you're always trying to, not tell and not even teach, especially at this age, but model, you know, dialogue. But I am mindful of what are those core messages? What are, because if there was just going to be a short list of things that you feel like you were consistent about, that you had wished that someone would have told you, and I want it to just be like from my book, but it's actually not. It's I think if I had one thing to say to the world or to my kids, it would be don't waste your life's energy worrying about what most people think. Definitely care about what a few people think and decide who those few are. I think that whether you call it your inner circle or your, close five or whatever it may be. I mean, I'm talking about a small group of people. Care about what they think. Definitely ask for pushback, ask for, challenge. But outside of that group, live your values and definitely care about your impact. But just don't lose energy on what people think. And I, it's funny, my son started high school this year, and I remember, it wasn't a couple of years ago, but years ago, starting high school. And I just remember all of the energy I put into wanting to be in the right circle and really wanting to make sure that this person thought this. And I mean, some of that's inevitable with being a teenager. I get that, but it didn't end in my teenage years. You know, you talk about the speaker spotlight party, you talk about, being an author. Like, you just, if I had a do-over, I would have pushed myself to say, care about what a few of the right people think. And then outside of that, just live your values. Have values, but live them. And then at the end of the day, what people think is up to them. And think about what you could do with that energy. What you could do with that energy that you wasted wondering and ruminating and all of that. And yeah, I mean, I, I'm still a work in progress with that, and yet that would be the one thing that I think I would maybe say to the world, but certainly say to my kids, like, get a small group, let them know you care about what they think for these reasons, and that you want them to let you know what they think. Like, you do need checks and balances, and you do need folks that you're accountable to, but then leave it at that.
Tim Arnold, man, you are in my soul right now. This I can't tell you how relevant this is, man. I was in a meeting yesterday where I felt like people forgot that I was in the room. It was a meeting about the Hamza Khan brand, and I was just cringing every time. Like, they were like, the Hamza Khan brand, the Hamza Khan brand. And this was part of my inner circle. These are people that I entrust with, like, figuring out how I'm going to appear, what I'm going to wear, what fonts I'm going to use. It was a lot for me. And I just had to breathe and think, oh, wow, I feel very naked. I feel very exposed here. This is very uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, like, I look around, I'm like, dude, this guy was the best man at my wedding. It's fantastic. This guy over here, he knows my parents.
Yeah.
Like, I've joked with this guy in ways that only him and I can understand. Like, these are the people who actually care. And there was a light in their eyes, but I also had to accept that it was a small group and I care deeply about them, but I equally care about the audience I'm going to meet this Friday. I'm going to stand before a bunch of leaders at a major Canadian financial institution, and I actually care about them. However, let's say in the worst case scenario, I completely bomb on Friday. I think this conversation is going to help me reframe that a little bit, which is I will feel the consequence of not performing well, not willing that into existence. But if it does happen, I'm going to minimize the amount of time and energy specifically that I would have spent before this conversation, because I'm a people pleaser, recovering people pleaser. I ruminate a lot. Like you, when I was in high school a long time ago, I was seeking approval. I was seeking acceptance, and it was always counterproductive. And so this sage advice is not only relevant for your kids, it's relevant for me, it's relevant for the viewers, for the listeners. This is some really good stuff. And in case you're watching this and thinking, yeah, but how does this fit with Tim Arnold's lead with and philosophy? I think I've got an answer for that, but I'd love to hear it from you. How does this fit within the overall philosophy of holding multiple perspectives, paradox, at the same time?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that in itself, and I honestly hadn't really thought about that until this very moment, but I think that in itself is a tension between care what some people think and also, uh, care about how you show up, but don't put energy into what everyone else thinks.
Exactly.
That's a piece of it. I mean, at the end of the day, I think the overarching message that I have been learning and then teaching about is, in life, never mind leadership, you got to solve problems all day. There are situations where you pick the right answer and you're done with it. But the more you want to show up well, the more you tackle the hard stuff, the more you're dealing with things that other people would rather not deal with. You now find yourself dealing with tensions to manage, complexities, paradoxes. And I think that you don't spend time with me to start doing that. You're already doing it. You're doing it as a friend, as a coworker, as a leader. Like, life is full of complexities. In a very either or world where we just want to pick sides and find our people, being able to kind of move beyond that and become an and thinker. It's not this or that, it's this and that. To even, you know, I know right now when I leave this studio, we go into a world where there's lots of polarization. We got people on the other side, whether we're talking politics or social issues or whether we agree with the company merger or not. To be able to recognize that I don't have to agree with them to learn from them. You know, that in fact, if I hang out mainly with people on my side, my learning goes down. So how do I become a person, a leader who can stand my ground and can have views and values and also be incredibly open, you know, rather than building walls, really truly build bridges.
Yeah,
You know,
literally, metaphorically. Yeah.
that's the hope. And, you know, again, going back an hour into our conversation, that was the gift that someone gave me years ago, to be able to look at the world that way, to be able to go beyond overly simplistic, lazy thinking that just sees everything as right, wrong, good, bad, yes or no, to recognize that there's a point where we have to not leave the right and wrongs, because again, that's your foundation, but to actually complement that with situations where you're okay with a little bit of complexity, that you're intrigued by mystery,
Wow.
that you are someone with the courage to navigate the gray. You know, that's the kind of, you know, person, husband, dad, business owner, leader I try to be, and I love being able to help people move forward in that direction.
Brilliant. That was it right there, Tim Arnold. The mic drop. Man, we moved from Saint Teresa through Delina, through Tim Arnold to Hamza to the world, to
And don't forget
posterity.
Timothy Chalamet.
And Timothy
Yeah.
Chalamet and John Hamm and just a whole array of characters here. This was, I knew this was going to be great. This was transcendent for me, man. Like the right advice at the right time. Like, thank you sincerely. You've been so generous with your experiences, your stories, your perspectives, and your hope for the world. It was there. Like you didn't have to say much more. Like, and thinking. There's just a fine line between that and systems. And I eagerly look forward to the day when our institutions, our systems of governance, our paradigms are able to hold opposition, are able to hold paradox. And I think that you are doing such important work, and you are leaving us, gifting us with wisdom in the form of your speeches, your books, through your entrepreneurship, through conversations just like this that I truly believe are going to become artifacts. People are going to look back at this 500 years from now and be like, that Tim Arnold dude was punk, man. In closing, I'm very curious to know, like, you know, here we are and you are the paragon of change friendliness. Is there any emerging wisdom in the distance that you're seeing and you're thinking, that's pretty cool, I want to move in that direction now? You know, is there anything that, to borrow your own idea, that you're considering saying yes to and leaning into? This was inspired by Bailey. There's only 3 questions, but Bailey's like, working a 4th question about the future.
Yeah, so I don't have like the answer to that question. I just recently turned 50, and it's a really interesting birthday. It's one that, you know, I leaned into the discipline of celebration. Like, it's like, you know, you got a healthy family, like there's just so much to celebrate. So we celebrated well. And I found that in this last year, I've been just asking that question a lot, you know, and with my inner circle, that small group of people, to say, what is getting on the plane and going to work on the ranch look like now? What is, you know, what does, because comfort now is different, but and comfort's not bad. It's the inhale and holding it. When it's comfort all the time in what you do and where you live and to some extent what you believe. Like, how do you take those leaps at this chapter? And I'd say that's going to be a to be continued, because I'm deep into that right now, and definitely think it's going to impact how I show up at work, and even what I'm focused on at work. I think it's got some adventures on the horizon for our family. So we're thinking a lot about that question.
I, sir, cannot wait to see what comes next. What is next? What is the next chapter, the next scene, the next story, spin-off, sequel? I have no idea what's going to happen, but you have kept us on our toes for your entire life, sir. And you have modeled a level of change friendliness, of a sort of dexterity when it comes to thinking about uncertainty that is truly, truly inspiring. Tim Arnold, man, thank you so much for being here with us, the community of learners on Sage Advice. That was Tim Arnold, and what a needed voice in our divided, hurried world. Tim reminds us that leadership isn't about choosing sides, it's about holding space for tension, paradox, and possibility. It's about saying yes to both compassion and accountability, both results and relationships, both ambition and rest, breathing in and breathing out. His wisdom, earned in boardrooms and shelters alike, teaches us that the best leaders aren't those who have all the answers. They're the seekers, the ones who are willing to sit in the questions with others. Tim, can't thank you enough for reminding us that the and is where growth lives. And thank you for modeling what grounded human leadership really looks like. I'm Hamza Khan, and this is Sage Advice. Until next time, stay hopeful.